If all you know is what you read in a book that is not inspired by the Spirit of God, you will understand so much about the BIOS. Most of our doctors, our lab scientists, our psychologists, our physiologists, our anatomists, they are masters of the body life. But man is deeper. When you go into psychology, you begin to talk about the soulish life. And even at that level, psychologists are limited, because there are many aspects of the soul that is aided by spirit. And that's why any disease that is schizophrenic in nature, they are helpless. They don't know what to do. The best they can do is to sedate you and weaken you. They don't know what it is. And in medicine today, there's what they call idiopathic medicine. There are medical conditions that they can't trace the root, because man is bigger than body. Man is also bigger than soul. Man is spirit. It is in the context of the gospel that you will understand your potentials from the spirit perspective. And that is where the real you dwells. And so the gospel is essential because it helps us to understand God. It helps us to understand what God has done for us to live life to the full. And it also helps us to understand who we ought to be now that we have received God and everything God has made available to us. And so in an attempt to understand the gospel, we began to look at the three major components of the gospel. Of course, you can diversify it to four, but three major components of the gospel. And we said the first aspect of the gospel is what we call the gospel of the kingdom. If you look at scriptures, you'll see it replete. Matthew chapter 4 from verse 2, Matthew 24 verse 14. It said, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached as a witness in all the worlds. So there is the gospel of the kingdom. And then you have the gospel of grace. You'll find that in Galatians chapter 1 from verse 6. Paul was talking to the church in Galatia. And he said, I marvel that you are soon removed from the grace, from him that has called you unto the grace of Christ, unto another gospel. So he calls a gospel here the gospel of grace. And then you also have the gospel of God, or the gospel of the Son of God, or the gospel of Christ. And you find that in Romans chapter 1 from verse 1, verse 9, and verse 16. Paul said he was called into the gospel of God. In verse 9, he said he served God in the spirit in the gospel of his Son. And in verse 16, he said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It's the power of God unto salvation. So Matthew 24:14 shows us the gospel of the kingdom. Galatians 1:6 shows us the gospel of grace. And then Romans 1 verse 1, verse 9, and verse 16 shows us the gospel of the Son. Now, when you look at all of these nomenclatures, you begin to wonder which of them is the pattern for us to follow. If there are three expressions of the gospel, how do we understand them? Where do they connect? And that was the burden we tried to unravel and address 2 Sundays ago. We said the gospel of the kingdom primarily speaks about the good news of a king that comes to exert his dominion over a people. And we said that good news is not tyranny. We said that good news is the king expressing his dominion over you so that you enjoy of his benevolence, because it makes you a citizen of his kingdom. So when we are talking about the gospel of the kingdom, we are talking about the sovereign reign of God over his creation. We have been under several governments, and we have seen that even the best of them cannot bring us to the full actualization of our potentials. Look at the government we are under in our dear country today, for instance. You have promises upon promises that are never actualized. So there are many governments, but God has decided to extend the message to the earth. And his message is simple. I want to be your king. I want to be your Lord. I want to be your master. And I am not like men that deceive. I'm not like men that lie. I'm making you a citizen of my kingdom so that I am your Lord, I am your Father, and I am your King. And when we look at God's operation, we discover that this kind of message is actually too good to be true. And so the reason they call it the gospel is because the message is actually too good to be true. So the word evangelion, which is good news or gospel, actually means too good to be true. That God, the creator of the ends of the earth, decides to have a personal relationship with you, to make you his son, and to make you a citizen of his kingdom. And the way God's kingdom works is that God does not have king and servants. He has king and kings, Lord and Lord. So in his kingdom, we are not servants. We are actually kings, because he doesn't have servants in his kingdom. That's why this message becomes too important, that he changes your status and make you to co-rule and to co-inherit with him. And so we said this gospel is called the gospel of the kingdom. However, we discovered that God wanted to initiate this gospel in the book of Genesis, but the man allowed himself to be deceived by the serpent. So he left the dominion of God. When God started initiating this process in Eden, he created the garden. The man didn't need to do anything. He put the man in the garden. Everything the man required, he made available to him. And he gave the man authority to rule on the earth as his deputy in the natural realm. Because the man was also given the status of a king. But the man did not understand that it was an invincible kingdom